Hi everyone, and welcome to our channel. In this next series of videos, we're going to be doing a step-by-step recreation or creation of an Aviator wing badge
using the Aspire software from Vectric. But first, I'd like to thank everybody watching and who have subscribed to our channel. If you haven't yet, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and click on the bell so you'll be notified of upcoming videos. Also, if you're happy with our work and want to help, consider buying me a coffee. The link for the coffee is down below in the description. It is all very much appreciated. So let's get started. The history of the badge goes back to the First World War, between 1914 and 1917. They are issued by the U.S. Armed Forces for the Air Force, Army, and Navy. The Air Force and Army Aviator badges are issued in 3 ratings: Basic, Senior, and Command for the Air Force, and Master for the Army. The higher degrees are denoted by a star or a star with a wreath above the badge. The Naval Aviator Badge is issued in a single rating for Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard aviators. The Aviator Badge currently used in the Navy has remained virtually unchanged since it was first issued on the 13th of November 1917 and is earned by all U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps, and the U.S. Coast Guard pilots upon graduation from advanced flight training. To begin, we'll need to open a new session of Aspire. I'm going to create a new session of Aspire, and I'm going to set the size to about 5.5 by 4.5 by 3/4 inch thick, simply because I only want to be able to make the model of the wing, and I want to have all the pixels within my workspace focused on just that wing itself to give the best quality. I import the picture of the flight badge that I would like to make. This is my approach to how I would do things. I know everyone will find their own way and their own process to be able to do this. The next step is to create a bounding vector around my workspace, simply so I can see the limits of my workspace. Change the color to red so it's a little bit more visible. I then enlarge the size of the picture, just to focus on the left side wing. This is where that red closed vector of the bounding box of my workspace comes into handy. I can then position it and increase the size as needed. Once I have that set, I'm going to make a copy of my original photograph and just simply move it above the first one. This is for reference, so I can constantly keep checking back to the full-size version of the badge that I want to make. Because I'm going to take my first badge, click on my bounding square, hold the Shift key down and choose my picture, and then click on the icon to crop the bitmap. I only want to work around just the left wing. Again, this is my process, and it helps me keep focused on the mission at hand. Don't forget to save your work on a regular basis. It would be a shame for you to lose the work you've created simply because you forgot to save it. The next step that I chose was to create the profile of that first top wing. I draw a vector, thinking how deep it is and the shape. Clicking on that shape and hitting the N key to enter into the node edit mode, I can adjust the nodes as needed. My first step usually is to change them to Bezier curves by hitting the S key where needed, and of course moving them to fit the profile as I think it would be. So drawing vectors and node editing becomes an important part in any 3D modeling process. I changed the color so I can see it a little bit clearer. And then I know I'm going to be using the 2-rail sweep for this option, so I create my rails. Notice that these vectors go well beyond where the feather is, simply because the feather usually would go beyond the visual, and I try to make it as realistic as possible, based upon the image that we're given. Select the nodes and hit the S key to smooth them out. Choose my 2 rails. I'm going to change the contrast of the picture so I can see it just a little bit better. I then select the vectors, choose my 2-rail sweep option, and my profile. And there's my first wing. It's a process we'll be repeating over and over and over again. Many times I see feathers in wings that are simply a rounded dome. In my mind, this is more of a flat dome, but the important part are the little cuts in the feathers themselves. And how I approach that is by simply clicking on the image, holding the Shift key down, and clicking on the component of that first feather, and going into the sculpting tool. I can view the picture by checking on the Show Overlay and adjusting its quality or opacity. And I'm going to zoom in and delete the left-hand point of the feather. So I choose the Undo brush, but if I hold the Shift key down, it works more like an eraser than anything else. Once I have that finished, I then attend to the small cuts within the feather itself. And here's what I've come up with. I use the smudge tool and push up into the feather. I then come back with the Undo brush and use it on the right-hand side of that cut. What happens is your right-hand side has a very nice sharp edge, but your left-hand side is more rounded. And that's how I envision these cuts within the feather. You'll need to do this for each cut on each feather. It may be time-consuming, but it's important. It's also important to keep your work along the way, so you don't spend hours and hours and then accidentally delete something and all of your work disappears. One nice factor is that with the Undo brush, if you're not happy with your stroke of the distort, you can always undo it and start again. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's definitely worthwhile. to replicate the cuts or different things within your 3D model that you're trying to attempt. Slow and steady, I simply smudge the work from the bottom to the top. And you can see how the left-hand side has a nice rounded look to it, but the right-hand side of the cut simply doesn't quite look right. And that's where the undo brush comes in handy. This is a process that can't be rushed. Take your time, and eventually you'll get finished. I'm not happy with how this came out, so I'm going to undo it and try it again. And remember to keep your work every so often. That means whatever you've done will be saved. The next step is to draw the vectors for the remaining feathers in the lower section of the wing. Simply clicking and drawing the vector and going beyond what I'll call the top wing is important. I could have created the vectors for all the wings and all the parts at one time, but I wanted to show you the step-by-step process. As I've said earlier, everyone's going to have their own way of doing something. This is just my way of how I would approach creating this badge. Creating vectors and node editing become a very, very important fundamental basic step within model making. And extending the feather on the right hand side beyond the top wing, as I'll call it. So the feather tucks underneath the top wing. It's important to pay attention to the shape of the feather as well as the overall look of the feather, whether it's flat or rounded, whether it has those cuts as we've seen just a bit ago, or extra ribs, as you can see in these lower 4 or 5 feathers. So I'll have to keep that in mind about how to create the model for those extra ribs. With the vectors for these feathers drawn, the next step would be to simply enter into the node editing mode, select all the nodes, hit the S key to smooth them, and then I like to use the Fit Curves to Vector option. It reduces the number of nodes down to a manageable amount. And that's what it looks like for the bottom part of the wing. I'm going to select my second feather and create a component. As I've said, I've seen a lot of feathers that are simply rounded. I don't think that's what these look like. I would prefer them to be flat, but I'm not happy with the square 90-degree corner of a feather either. So I choose the domed profile, the shape profile within the Create Shape option of this feather, and I'm going to limit the height to it. The numbers are random, or at least I look at the 3D view to see what looks comfortable. So the feather now has a rounded edge and a flat top. But I also tilt it slightly from top to bottom, so the top of the feather actually tucks underneath the previous one. It helps me maintain a certain height of the model itself, because I'm not constantly keeping to add height to each of those feathers. That slight tilt or fade comes in handy. And I repeat this process for each of the feathers on this lower section of the wing. I've been using this software for many years, and I've come to trust the view that I see in our 3D view window. I'll manipulate the components and adjust them so it looks right. Shape height, base height, the limit height, as well as the tilt or fade. And of course, the component property for each of these feathers is set to merge. Notice how using the tilt alters the look of the entire feather itself. The next feather I've noticed is slightly different. It's not quite as flat as the previous ones. In my mind, or at least to my eye, it looks to be more rounded, more domed shape. I can hide the components I've just created just to make sure that I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. Once I've decided the shape it needs to be, I'll go back in, select the vector, and create a shape. And we're only dealing with domed shapes at this point in time. But now with this little feather, I'm going to have no limit, because the flat just doesn't look right. Once I'm happy with the shape that I have, I continue on. The issue, though, is these last 4 feathers of this larger section of the wing appear to be going in the opposite direction. The one on the extreme left-hand side is tucked under the next one to the right of it. So we just need to tilt them in the opposite direction. I select my vector, create my shape, again using the domed shape, also limiting the height of that component, and I'm going to tilt it from the right to the left. Luckily, since this badge is symmetrical, I'm only going to need to make one of these wings, because I can simply then flip it, the entire component or the entire model, over to the right hand side. So spend a good amount of time on this one side of the wing. You'll be happy with the end results. Choosing the next vector, applying the same properties, and then tilting it from the right to the left, it will tilt up all the time. Have you noticed how I keep using my 3D view to check the size and shape and position of the feathers? I do that a lot. I look at it from different angles to make sure it looks appropriate. Simply holding my left mouse key down and dragging my cursor will allow me to rotate my 3D view around so I can get a better look at it from different perspectives. And there's our feathers. Our next step is to create again the little notches, the little separations in each of the feathers as need be. Selecting the appropriate feather, holding the Shift key down and selecting the image, we go into the sculpting tool, making sure that our overlay is visible. We use the smudge tool like we did previously and just push up from the bottom, and then use the undo tool to smooth out or return back to its original shape the right hand side of that cut. And you would repeat this process for each of the feathers as required. Couple things to note. Look how the rounded feather looks as compared to the original. And notice how the feather extends further to the right. That's okay. If it was too long, we can always cut it off. But the reality of it is that the feather probably does extend further than we can see. So there's really no magic to it all, just a few little tricks. and a lot of patience. Hopefully by now, I hope you can see the process and you're willing to give it a try. I'm not going to go through each of the feathers, but in the real world, I would have to. If your computer has a keyboard attached to it, you can certainly use the numbers to be able to switch between the smudge tool and the undo tool much faster than clicking on the icons. So that's my little secret for the feathers. I hope it makes sense, and I hope you give it a try, because I believe in the end it looks a lot more realistic. After I've done all the cuts on the individual feathers for this lower section of the wing itself, we need to add the ribs to the very small little pin feathers at the very bottom. I simply drew an arc, a vector, and a small arc, more like a half circle, for the profile shape, because after selecting the rib vectors, I'm going to use the extrude and weave option. These ribs, the component property has been set to add because I want them to sit on top of the little feathers themselves. Next up is another process that I use on a regular basis. Once I'm happy with one section or a few things that are together, I will take those and make a copy of the visible model. So I'm only working with that group that's been made into a model or a component itself. I reduce the risk of me moving things out of place because I've spent the time arranging them correctly, and I don't want to ruin that. So I hide the components that I don't want to include into this new component. And what I see in the 3D view will be made into a single component, and that's the one then I can work with. I only want to see that. I go back into my sculpting tab, and I'm going to smooth out the ribs ever so slightly. Again, this is my process. If you'd like to duplicate it, you're more than welcome, but I'd rather you find a process that you're comfortable with. Maybe a little bit of mine and a little bit of yours. I really don't concern myself with how much time I'm spending on this because I want it to be right. I want it to look as good as possible. The other nice thing about this 3D model, the wing itself, it could be used for many different badges and different applications. So this is just not a one-time component or model that I'm creating. I expect to be able to use this over and over and over again. In fact, I could use it without the ribs if I wanted by simply deleting the copy of the visible model and resetting them. So let's take a look at it. I turn on the other feathers, but now of course I need to change the component property of that group of pin feathers and set it to merge. And that's what it looks like. I compare it to the original, and I'm rather happy with it. I'm going to change the shape height of those small little feathers just a little bit. And I guess you can see the give and take, the back and forth between the sculpting and the model height, the shape height. It's an ongoing process. Don't get too hung up on it though, because you can spend and waste a lot of extra time on things that maybe don't really require that much attention. It'll be a fine line that you'll have to choose. Once I'm happy with the end result, I go back and make a copy of the visible model. You've seen that process before. And then I'm going to export it or save it as a 3D clip art. That way, I can bring this component into a new session of our Aspire to be able to create the entire wing. That's it for this part. The next lesson we're going to show is the top wing. There are some special tips and tricks that I've used to be able to create this. I hope you join me for the next episode as we look at the top part of the wing. Thanks for joining. I hope you got to see and learn a little bit, and hope you follow along to create your own Aviator wing badge. Again, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell so you're reminded of our new videos. And if you'd like to, buy me a cup of coffee. I would really appreciate it. It'll help go towards creating new videos for you to enjoy. As always, if you'd like to learn more about the software, come back again. Or if you have a question, send me an email, mm@mezalick.com. Thanks. Enjoy. See you soon.